everybody, Jim Hickey, also known as @Doc Bass or @Bass Fishing Tips on Twitter. Back to you with another quick video, this time addressing, well, an adaptation, I guess, of a rig that's been around for a long time. And I know people have used actually even similar things to this in the past in certain settings, but we're getting to the time of year. Okay, we're going into the late fall period and then through the winter when, in any place that's fortunate enough to have open water, in cold water environments, bass get rather sluggish, and they typically want things quite often with baits that are sitting right in front of them. So one of the common techniques that is used this time of year and throughout the winter are suspending jerkbaits, because you can get it down to a certain depth and then you can pause the bait and just let it literally sit in the water column. If you have a bass there sitting looking at it, they can wait till it triggers another movement and triggers their strike. So they can, I guess, evaluate, not expend too much energy, and theoretically get the food they need in order to maintain themselves through the winter by being in that mode. Another technique that's also very popular during the winter is something called the float and fly. Except for float and flies, which is similar to a setup that you see here on the screen, is different in that it's an ultra finesse technique. Okay, here I'm addressing 12-pound test line with the typical float and fly that's used out there. They're using anywhere from 8-pound test down to 2-pound test, usually fluorocarbon. Smaller bobbers and stops. The leader length between the float and the actual bait can vary depending on the depth of water they're fishing. And the jigs they use are, an 1/8 ounce at the largest down to a 32nd ounce, or sometimes even smaller. So, like I said, it's an ultra finesse type rig. Now, this rig or something like it, I used, or actually use even today, at certain times during the years when I'm fishing in the saltwater creeks for stripers, especially when there's a lot of bait in the water and the fish can get real finicky. Because again, I can allow this rig to float down the creek very slowly. Oftentimes use a jig that'll have some bait hanging off the end of it. Could be a sand eel, could be a small eel, maybe a sea worm. And it'll help trigger those bass when they're in this kind of mindset. And this is what freshwater bass are, in that mindset today. They want something that's actually sitting there, suspending, hanging in the water column so they can get a look at it. They don't have to work very hard for it. They can, get the food they need theoretically without expending a lot of energy. It's basically what it comes down to. And so what triggered this is actually a friend of mine, Mark Easterling, known as @BlackBass on Twitter. He's been dealing with this type of situation for the last couple of weeks, where instead of using the top waters that he loves to use, he's been using things like suspending spots. He's also gone to things like spoons and inline spinners and things like that. Of course, the trouble with spinners and inline spoons is you can't suspend them. You got to get them while they're on the fly. Fortunately, he's had a shad bite going on. But as the water cools even more, those fish are going to want things suspended. He's going to go back to suspended spots. So he's felt rather limited. He's looked for different types of baits to use, and he has a rig he could use. So in this case, rather than being a traditional float and fly, I have here what I refer to as the super float and fly. Okay, it's the antithesis of the ultra finesse technique. 12-pound test main line. Theoretically, you could use any line you'd want. I'd use fluorocarbon or at least a fluoro coated copolymer. Larger bobbers and stops. Phil makes a great line of bobbers. I think it's called the Wobbler, that is rated by weight of bait that'll support down under it, and I think it goes at least up to a 1/2 ounce, maybe even higher. Of course, this length here, the drop below the bobber and stop, could vary anywhere from 2 to 4 feet. I have a 2 to 4 feet here for Mark, who's fishing in like 2 to 5, 6 feet of water usually, and showing a hair jig down here. In this case, a 1/2 ounce pro jig. Of course, that could be a swim jig with a swim bait on it. It could be a lead head with a swim bait on it. It could be any sort of bait. You could probably even use a rattle trap, maybe, if you could get it to hang right. I know there's one company I think out there that makes the eyelet pretty much in the middle of the bait, so that would kind of hang perfectly under it. So if you wanted to use a larger size bait, you might consider going to that. Anything that would hang pretty much horizontally under this vertical rig would work in this case. So again, the super float and fly rig can be adapted to almost any situation. Again, this is targeting at Mark Easterling's situation where he's fishing in relatively shallow creeks, clear water environments. But here's a way to get a jig, which is something you can't normally leave just sitting in the water column, so it could actually sit in place, be suspended, and get those lethargic winter bass to hit. So again, hope you find this helpful, and we'll be back to you real soon with another video.